Hello everyone, welcome to Venkana English Guru. Friends, yesterday I started a topic called William Wordsworth, and we were actually talking about the writers. And suddenly, due to the technical error, where I had to stop the class. So again, we are actually talking about the same topic, that is William Wordsworth, the authors, and we are actually talking about the authors of Romantic period. And in relation to that, the first author is William Wordsworth. Friends, if my voice is clear, show me thumbs up so that you will have better clarity in my thought. So, William Wordsworth, and actually, I told you previously, and what I'm actually going to talk about as a part of writer's author's introduction. So, you can see, and he was born 1770 to 1850 and was born on 7th April 1770 and died on 23rd April 1850. So he lived for 80 years in his life, and he was a major important romantic poet. Hence, he's called the greatest poet of the Romantic period. And this age is also called the Age of Wordsworth. And together, St. Coleridge and Wordsworth published the lyrical ballads, which is considered to be the beginning of Romantic period, where we discussed previously. And his father and mother, John Wordsworth and Cookson, and father and mother, but he had a very close association with his sister and Dorothy Wordsworth. Okay, and as he was from Lake District, and he is called one of the Lake School poets. Next, and his father was a lawyer, but he died when Wordsworth was just 13, and he lost his mother when he was just 8, and he lost his parents when he was below in teenage itself, and very pathetic condition. Wordsworth married his childhood friend Mary Hutchinson, and who published the Prelude at the end. Following the death, he became the poet laureate in 1833, and from 1830 to 1843, Robert Southey worked as a poet laureate. After the death of Robert Southey, Wordsworth became the poet laureate, and he worked as a poet laureate, but he is the only poet laureate who did nothing and who did not write any official verses as the poet laureate, and worked from 1843 to 50. This is very important. And uh, and you know, next, he had a lot of passion for, he was the only poet laureate who wrote and who did not write any official verses, and he had a lot of passion for traveling. Hence, he traveled to France, Italy, and other parts of the world. And because, and he had a notion that, and the nature is the only reason to write, to compose poetry, because that became, nature became a kind of stimulus to Wordsworth to compose poetry. Hence, and he had a lot of traveling in his life, along with Dorothy, along with St. Coleridge. And Robert Browning called him, critiqued, and he made a critical comment on Wordsworth, saying that you are the lost leader, because as the leader, you were not able to oppose the first reform bill or second reform bill when they were passed by the Victorian government, because the first reform bill was passed in 1832 and the second 1837, and the Poor Law Act, which became popular, which was passed in 1833, that created a number of disparities among the poor class, middle class, and and sophisticated rich class people. And rich became richer, poor became poorer. This was not accepted by Robert Browning. Hence, he he made a critical comment on Wordsworth by saying the lost leader. This is very important, my friends. And Dorothy Wordsworth, who was an essayist and diarist, and he had a very wonderful close association with Dorothy Wordsworth, because he composed Lucy poems along with Dorothy, and he had a lot of impact of Milton, Spenser, and Shakespeare, and all the sonnets that were composed by Wordsworth that come under Miltonic sonnets, which means Miltonic sonnets are nothing but an Italian sonnet or Petrarchan sonnet, where the sonnet is divided into two parts, octava and sestet, and but the rhyme scheme is different between the Petrarchan and this. Next, friends, and relationship with Anita Valen. He had a, and because he had the habit of traveling different parts of the world, and he visited France during the French Revolution in 1791, where he met this lady, Anita Valen, where he developed and relationship, and where they were able to give birth to a child, and the name of the child Caroline, and the baby child. And but he did not marry her and left her, but that lady died in the middle, and where he had to look after this girl baby Caroline. And 1793, the first publications, the first collection of poetry that were published by Wordsworth in 1793, An Evening Walk and Descriptive Sketches, two important works that were published by uh, uh, Wordsworth. And he met and Coleridge in 1795. Next, together Wordsworth and Coleridge, as we discussed previously, published lyrical ballads. As I mentioned in my previous lectures, lyrical ballads begins with the poem The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, written by Coleridge. Lyrical ballads ends with ode, lines composed a few miles about Tintern Bay, or simply you can say ode Tintern Bay. So the last poem of lyrical ballads, Tintern Bay, the first poem, Rime of the Ancient Mariner. For this lyrical ballads, which includes 23 ballads, 4 were written by Coleridge, 19 were written by Wordsworth. And you need to know, because and the lines composed a few miles above Tintern Bay, this is one of the autobiographical works composed by Wordsworth, apart from the Prelude and Ode, Intermissions of Immortality. And one of the most famous poems, Tintern Bay, was published in this collection along with Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And where and this lyrical ballads, and which was published later under the title The Preface to Lyrical Ballads, 1800, Preface to Lyrical Ballads, 1802, Preface to Lyrical Ballads, 1805, where he talks about the Preface to Lyrical Ballads, 1800, where he mentions that is the Poetic Manifesto, where he talks about, where he discusses the theory of poetry, qualifications of poet, and other issues that were related to poetry. And hence the Romantic period is considered to be the greatest, the magnum opus of English poetry. And as I mentioned previously, Elizabethan period is considered to be the greatest age of English drama, whereas and Romantic period is considered to be the greatest age of English poetry, because and the Poetic Manifesto, where he mentions the qualities of a poet and the qualifications of a poet, and what is a good poetry, and how poetry is to be written, what is the role of poetic diction, and all that he mentions in 1800s publication of Preface to Lyrical Ballads, and where he talks about the importance of prospectus, the common human thinking, the common language, and avoids the use of poetic diction, poetic decorum, the use of rules and regulations and prosaic features, and that were mainly given importance during in the previous period, like neoclassicism. And he also mentions, because all the Romantic poets, they favored innovation rather than following traditionalism. Hence their poems are considered to be experimental in nature. Next, between 1795 and 97, Wordsworth wrote one play, The Border. This is a partial success. The Border, it's a words tragedy, remember this. And he wanted to write about this King Henry III of England, when Englishmen in North Country came into conflict with Scottish rovers. He attempted to get the play staged, but it was rejected, because he wanted to write in 3 parts, but he could finish only the part 2, and he left part 1 and part 3. Hence it was rejected by many editors. And Wordsworth is so popular for this Wordsworth, and who is considered to be one of the members of this Lake School poets, because as he was from the Lake district, Wordsworth called the Sute. These 3 are considered to be the Lake School poets, because all of them are from Lake School district. And the word Lake School poet, which is actually coined by Francis Jeffrey, and he was actually editing the book Biography Literaria, the autobiographical texts of. You may also have a bit like, who coined the word Lake School poet? Francis Jeffrey, when? 1817. And in which context? While reviewing the autobiography of and St. Coleridge's Biography Literaria. Who are they? And who of the following is not? So all of them you require. And most of the poems of most of the works that were composed by Wordsworth dealt with death, dealt with endurance, patience, dealt with separation and grief. So the major ideas, the major themes and through which Wordsworth composed his poetry was all about these areas, themes. And like our video and share our video and while watching. Okay, next. And what are the important works that were composed by Wordsworth? And the first one, An Evening Walk and Descriptive Sketches. And second, Lyrical Ballads. And I'm giving you only few because it includes 23, but I don't think there are 23. But you need to remember the first poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Last poem, Lines Composed a Few Miles Above Tintin Bay. This is autobiographical in nature. Anecdote for fathers, you might be reading in different exams, for different examination. We had 7. We Met a Cottage Girl, the wonderful poem. And the first poem that is composed by Wordsworth in Lyrical Ballads, we had 7. Okay, and the first poem that is composed by St. Coleridge, Rime of the Ancient Mariner. The first poem of Lyrical Ballads, Rime of the Ancient Mariner, remember. So, this is not a part of this. This is a kind of mistake. Do remember? This is not a part of Immortality Ode. This is not a part of this. Unexpectedly, I included this. Okay. And remember, we had 7. Simon Lee, lines written in early spring, and expulsation and reply, the table stand, the thorn, some of the important works, poems which become Preface to Lyrical Ballads, 1800, as I told you. Preface to Lyrical Ballads, 1800. Preface to Lyrical Ballads 2, 1802. Preface to Lyrical Ballads 3, 1805. Remember, because dates of dates from romantic periods are very, very important, because most of the dates that were given before romanticism, and sometimes most of the dates are not going to be correct. Maybe one or two years may be different, but from this onwards there was a particular record for all that. So this a slumber did my spirit sail, Michael. And you need to know the Ruined Cottage, pastoral poem, The Kitten, I Traveled Among Unknown Men, some of them. Next, poems in 2 volumes. This is very important. Poems in 2 volumes, which is also called Resolution and Independence. Remember, poems in 2 volumes, 1807. This is also called Resolution and Independence. 2 titles. Poems in 2 volumes, which is also called Resolution and Independence. Remember, this collection of poetry, which begins with the Spring Morning. You might have read a poem called at the school level, Spring Morning. It's a very popular poem where which talks about the activities of and different creatures in the nature. And other poems, I wandered lonely as a cloud. You might have read at maybe at your school at 10+2 or somewhere. And this is also called Daffodils. I wandered lonely as a cloud. There was a big daffodils. What is the beginning line of Daffodils? I wandered lonely as a cloud. And child is the father of man. You might have read this quotation several times. This is actually the first line of My Heart Leaps. Okay. Next, Ode, Intermissions of Immortality, because this misplaced as a part of Lyrical Ballads. This is also one of the autobiographical works that is composed by Wordsworth, Ode to Duty, and The Solitary Reaper, the popular work. And London, 1802, September 3, 1802, The World is Too Much with Us. This is a popular sonnet composed by Wordsworth. This is Wordsworthian sonnet, and which is modeled on and the Miltonic sonnet. Okay, divided into 8+6. And Guide to Lakes, To the Cuckoo, The Excursion, Laudamia, the Prelude. And the Prelude, as I told you, it is autobiographical work that is composed by Wordsworth, and it is composed in 14 volumes, and where he talks about bliss was that the dawn to be alive. That is the beginning line. This was started in 1750s or 1790s, and that was finished in 1850. And this was published by his wife, Mary Atkinson, after 3 months of his death. Okay, and this was addressed and dedicated to St. Coleridge, as I mentioned. And Lucy poems. Lucy poems were written in collaboration with Dorothy Wordsworth. The Borders and the Reckless, Unfinished Work. Next, friends, and what is the style and theme of Wordsworth? Okay, what is the style and theme of Wordsworth? Most of the poems that were composed by Wordsworth come under philosophical. Philosophical in terms of nature. Philosophy, the moment you read the poetry that is composed by Wordsworth, it's all about philosophy. philosophy of nature, philosophy of beauty, philosophy of poetry. And he becomes as one of the philosophers of poetry. So nature, and where he actually mentions a number of definitions as I mentioned previously. Poetry refers to the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings and emotions recollected in tranquility, a popular dialogue. Poetry refers to breadth and finite spirit of all knowledge, another important line that is mentioned by Wordsworth. And poetry refers to prospectus, which is my main region of my song. So by that we can understand and what poetry and was actually dealt by Wordsworth. And he also talks about the qualifications of the poet. The dignity of the art is very important to a poet, and possessed of more than usual organic sensibility, organic, natural. And so organic sensibility is nothing but the spontaneous nature. That is very important, not learned or the purposefully used. Next one, we has also thought long and deep. Thought long and deep, which is nothing but sublimity. Your thoughts, your ideas, your action should be useful to at least four people in the world. That is what. And your thought should be always deeper and very fruitful for a lot of people. You might be reading a lot of stories as a kid where an old man and digs and where he wanted to uh, plant the seed of a mango, but he's not going to live in this world, but and he plants that and he says to the king who asks a question, and this plant is not going for me, it is not for me, it is for the future generation. This is going to be the long thought, great idea, like that. So his poetry, most of the poetry, once you read the poetry of people, not just Wordsworth, P.B. Shelley, John Keats, Lord Byron, Robert Southey, Charles Lamb, Hester Coleridge, any writer, Robert Burns, William Blake, and their poetry simply talks about the long thoughts, deep thoughts, greatest actions. Next, Wordsworth declares his preference for incidents and situations from common life. What actually happens in the normal field? That became a source for writing poetry. That became a theme of the poetry composed by Wordsworth and in his poetry. So incidents and events that usually happen in one's surroundings. And humble and rustic life, another important, rustic rural life. Most of the people we like, if you are a very good literature student, you feel like staying not in a crowd, in a rustic field, in a village, in a hamlet. So that's what the setting of the poetry composed by Wordsworth. It's all about nearby the river, and near to a sea, near to a mountain, and which is about a dark cloud, or which is about a hamlet, which is about people work in a field. So very common activities, common human thinking, common people, the downtrodden communities, the poor class people. Not art is not for the sophisticated or orthodox. Art is about the poor people, downtrodden people, the people who do not have hand to mouth kind of life, and a humble, a rustic life who exhibits honesty. Next, and you can also see, and he also talks about the people who exhibit innocence and how the concept of innocence leads to their maturity. And even he talks about the kind of innocence and how people exhibit, how children exhibit in different poems. And his poems contain little poetic diction, as I mentioned previously. And his poetry is exactly opposite to the use of poetic diction and is against to this. The use of decorum, use of couplets, use of heroic stanzas, use of blank verse. He composed only a few poems in blank verse. Though he was well educated, but he used a little poetic diction and used only poetic diction in only a few poems, not in all. That's the greatness. And are written in a selection of the real language of men in a state of vivid sensations. We discussed. Next, Wordsworth writes under a strong emotional stimulus, and is free from banality and prosaism. Okay, that poetry should not be banned by somebody, and vulgar kind of poetry which was not at all written by Wordsworth. And his poetry was entirely against prosaism. Prosaism is nothing but prosody, use of rhetoric, use of figurative expressions, use of rhyme scheme, use of poetic diction. So which is against to these two. And gay and joyous and vigorous, very strong, For example, once you look at the word, my heart leaps, the drowsy numbness, so not this. The child is the father of man. Once you understand this, the child is the father of man, the sentence itself gives you a lot of meaning, and a gay, joyous, and vigorous, very strong poetry which influences most of the philosophers influence a lot. You can see Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, Longinus, and many experts, and most of them are philosophers. And you can read the poetry of Tagore, and he was a philosopher. And first he was a poet, dramatist, novelist, and he became a philosopher, and very influenced a lot of people like Wordsworth. So philosophy, Miltonic sweep. So sometimes mainly with regard to the themes of poetry and with regard to the sonnets where he followed Milton. And as we discussed, Milton, Spenser, and Shakespeare influenced his writing. In 1814, and where he also used blank words. One of his best blank words poems was his autobiography, The Prelude. And in 1814, Wordsworth published The Excursion as the second part, Excursion, which is actually a second part of the Reckless. And the first part and the third part were not written by Wordsworth. Yes, is it okay? Are you able to listen to me carefully? Yes, if you are listening to me, if you are listening consciously, show me thumbs up immediately. Yes, friends, show me thumbs up so that I can understand that you've been watching properly. Yes, come on, show me thumbs up. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you, buddy. Thank you, guys. Yes, yes. Show me thumbs up. Yes, thank you, sir, for your kind, mature, and our service. Okay. Yes, yes. Yes, guys. And don't forget about this. Yes. What are the important poetic techniques of Wordsworth? And where Wordsworth is known for spots of time, pantheism, prospectus, Lucy songs, and poetic symbolism. Remember, my friends, spots of time, the process of talking about and common incidents, common situations, everyday situations. What you see, you come back and you talk about. That is considered to be the spots of time refers to a process of composing poetry based on the real incidents and situations that happen to you in your practical life. You see people, a lot of people, most of the writers, they become popular. For example, you can see one of the popular writers, novelist of the present today, J.K. Rowling, with her imagination, where she was able to earn a lot of money in these days. And writers like Wordsworth, they don't get much attention, because today people want a lot of creativity, but he believed that your poetry should be a combination of your, because if you really want to write poetry, you need to get a lot of inspiration from the real instance, real events. This is called technically spots of time. Next, pantheism. As I told you, you need to believe in nature, and you need to observe the nature. See, our old people more than 100 years ago, 50 years ago, how they used to learn everything. Today also, and most of the learning happens from observation. Pantheism, observing nature. And prospectus, which is exhibited by the writer. Prospectus, common human thinking, common language that is used by people, not the language which is used by sophisticated people, orthodox communities. No. So where your language should not include a lot of idiomatic expressions, a lot of phrasal verbs, no, which is not required, bombastic words, and the use of very complex collocations which are not required to write poetry. And what is required, your language should be understood by the common people. That is what prospectus. And Lucy's songs, and that are written by two, Wordsworth and Dorothy. Poetic symbolism, the process of using a number of symbols. You can see here Tintin, it's a symbol of both innocence and experience. And you can see the slumber did my spirit seal. Slumber, it's a kind of symbol. The world is too much with us, and the world, it's a symbol. So he went on using a lot of symbols as Blake and Shelley used. Next, you can see, my friends, and I'm giving you the summary of three important works. And the first one is Lines Composed a Few Miles Above Tintern Bay, and the second one is Ode Intermissions of Immortality, and the third one is going to be The Prelude. Okay, short summary in maybe 2 or 3, and maybe 10 to 15 lines. Lines composed a few miles about Interna Bay. You need to remember the full title. You will get what is the shortest title of lines composed a few miles about Interna Bay. Just simply lines. See, lines composed a few miles about Interna Bay. Friends, as I told you, Prelude, Interna Bay, Ode and the Intermissions of Immortality. PTI simply. Immortality, Tintanabe, Prelude. Everybody knows that Prelude, PTI, you can have a quote. What are the important autobiographical works that were written by Wordsworth? Prelude, Tintanabe, Immortality Word. That's it. Only 3. Okay. And lines composed a few miles about Tintanabe, often abbreviated Tintanabe or Tintanabe, or else you can say simply lines, the shortest title. It's a poem by Wordsworth. Tinton Abbey is actually a real life abbey is located in the southern Welsh country and Monmouthshire and was abandoned in 1536 in France. The poem is a particular interest in that Wordsworth the descriptions of the banks. This is very important. This Tinton Abbey, it is just like you can see Rajamandri Ghat, or you can say the Kaleshwaram Ghat, or the Ganga Ghats in Varanasi. You find different ghats like that. This was one of the popular places nearby the river what is the name of the river where you can find Tintana Bay? So the V. Remember this. So in lines composed a few miles about Tintana Bay, the poet talks about a river. What is the name of the river? V. And Tintana Bay is actually an abbey which is located at Dash River V. Very important, my friends. Next, outline a general philosophies of nature. In this, he talks about his philosophy of nature. Okay. Remember, my friends, and it has significance as a terminal poem of 1798 edition. This is actually taken from, this actually included lines composed a few miles about Interna Bay actually becomes a part of lyrical ballads published in 1798. As I mentioned, this is the last poem of lyrical ballads, and edition of lyrical ballads, terminal poem. Terminal is nothing but the last, and although it does not fit well into the titular category, being more and protracted and elaborate than its predecessor. The poem's full title, as given lyrical ballads, is lines written a few miles about Interna Bay on revisiting the banks of the Way during a tour July 13, 1798. Very, very, very important. July 13 and 1798. And the banks of the Way. Remember, the full title of the poem, lines composed a few miles about Interna Bay, and on revisiting, because he visited this place and 5 years early in 1793. Okay, and again he comes back with his sister, and who is his sister? Dorothy Wordsworth, and he goes on describing and his previous experiences, and he compares and his present experiences, and this just like a conversation where he goes on asking a number of questions, and I felt like that. Do you have the same feeling now? So see, same thing. And you visit a place once and you take your sibling to the same place. When you take that, and what kind of experiences that you have in your first visit, and you expect the same experiences in the second visitor. That is what the poem is all about. That's what I told you. This is one of his autobiographical works. But you should remember July 13, 1798, on revisiting the banks of the river, the name of the river. And what kind of form has been used in this? And the Chintanabbi is actually composed in blank words. What is blank words? As I told you, I've been repeating. It's a form of writing where the poet uses iambic pentameter lines without rhyme scheme. That's it. Okay. Next, Chintanabbi is composed in blank words, which is a name used to describe unrhymed lines in iambic pentameter. As I mentioned, next, the poem opens with the poet visiting a place called Tintana Bay and on the banks of the river Wee in southeast Wales, and he has visited it before but not for 5 years. So he visited that place 5 years ago, and now second time he is visiting on July 13, 1798. He visited that 5 years ago in 1793, remember. He remembers almost every detail, the sound and the mountain springs and the dark sycamore and hedgerows. Because, as I mentioned, Wordsworth is a very popular poet of nature, and he remembers even the sound of a creature. And he goes on talking about my sister Dorothy, and I remember the song, the same sound, and I'll be able to listen and hear the same song. And are you able to, do you have the same feeling? That he goes on asking a lot of questions. He looks back on the past 5 years that have gone by since his first visit to the place, and remembers how much the memory of this scene meant to him when he was and coped up in the city. That's what he says. Okay, this is what all about the some short summary of lines composed a few miles about Internet. Very important. And the date, July 13, 1798, first visit 1793, and along with his sister Dorothy Wordsworth, this poem is all about and his innocence and his maturity. When he first visit the place, and he has a lot of innocence about the place, and same thing that he finds when he revisits the place in his sister Dorothy. But he becomes so matured, and he says, and he makes a lot of statements. What I observed previously, I'm not able to see. The things that I've seen, now I can see no more. See, what a wonderful dialogue that he makes in that. And the second important poem, that is Ode, Intermissions of Immortality, from Recollections of Early Childhood. This is also autobiographical work. As I mentioned, Ode, Intermissions of Immortality, simply it is called Ode, Intermissions of Immortality from Recollections of Early Childhood, also known as simply Ode or Immortality Ode or Great Ode. Different titles, remember, Ode, Immortality Ode or Great Ode, Ode, Intermissions of Immortality from Recollections of from his childhood, early childhood. Very, very important, my friends. This is actually a poem by Wordsworth, completed in 1804 and published in Poems in 2 volumes in 1807. Lines composed a few miles about Internet 1798. And Immortality Word, 1807 poems in 2 volumes, which is also called Resolution and Independence. You need to know. The poem was completed in 2 parts, with the first 4 stanzas written among a series of poems composed in 1802 about childhood. The first 4 stanzas talk about a childhood. And the first part of the poem was completed and in 27th 18 and March 1802, and a copy was provided to Wordsworth, friend and fellow poet St. Coleridge, who responded with his own poem Dejection and Ode. This is very important. What was the poem that was written in response to Ode, Intermissions of Immortality, Dejection and Ode? Remember, the 4th stanza of the Ode ends with a question, and Wordsworth was finally able to answer it with 7 additional stanzas completed in 1804. So 4 plus 7, 11 stanzas. And the poem includes more than 160 lines. 160, remember. Next, it was first printed as Ode in 1807. This was first printed in 1807, and it until 1815 that was edited and reworked on the revision currently, Ode, Intermissions of Immortality. This is actually an irregular Pindaric oath. Okay, what type of poem is it? It's an irregular Pindaric oath. Next, in 11 stanzas, it is split into 3 movements. The first 4 stanzas discuss concern about lost vision. Okay, what he takes from nature, and the same thing that is not able to take. The second of 4 stanzas describes how age causes man to and lose sight of the divine. The third of 3 stanzas is hopeful in that memory of the divine allows us to sympathize with our fellow man. So, which is nothing but innocence to experience. Both, as I told you, what he takes inspiration from the nature, and he, as a child, as a human being, and he goes on talking about all that. That is why it is one of his autobiographical. The poem relies on the concept of pre-existence, the idea that the soul existed before the body, and to connect children with the ability to witness the divine within nature. So that's what we can identify God in nature as a child, not as a human being. That's what it talks about. As children mature, they become worldlier, because when we mature, what will happen? We are surrounded by all physical pleasures, physical aspects, Hence we don't think of the divinity in human beings, in nature. And the ode reveals Wordsworth's psychological growth. This is very important, my friends. This ode is all about psychological growth that is also found in his poems, the Prelude to Bay. How the man from his innocence to his maturity, psychological maturity, and one's life. That's what this poem talks about. Next, and I hope you remember all the time. Next, the Prelude. What is it all about? Because several times there were plenty of bets based on this. And the Prelude, and which is also called the growth of the poet's mind, the subtitle, remember? What is the subtitle of this? Growth of the poet's mind. And it's an autobiographical poem, as I mentioned previously. It's a autobiographical poem composed in blank words. Blank words. What are the poems that are composed by Wordsworth in blank words? Very, very important. And intended as the introduction to the more philosophical poem. It's a philosophical poem and reckless, and which Wordsworth never finished. And Prelude is extremely personal work, reveals many details of Wordsworth's life, because as he talks about his personal relationships and his relationship with his and lover Anita Allen and his child Carolyn and his wife Mary Hutchinson, his friendship with St. Coleridge. This poem was addressed and dedicated to St. Coleridge, as I mentioned previously. And he took a lot of insights from his sister Dorothy. Wordsworth began the Prelude in 1798, as I mentioned previously, at the age of 28, and continued to work on it throughout his life. He never gave it a title, but called the poem. Title not yet fixed upon Coleridge is letters to his sister Dorothy Wordsworth. The poem was unknown to the general public until the final version was published 3 months after the Wordsworth's death in 1850. At present, the title was given to it by his widow Mary. So the title, which is actually given by his wife Mary Hutchinson in 1850. Okay. This is what, as I mentioned, the Prelude, which is actually addressed and dedicated to St. Coleridge. And what the first line, and where he actually talks about bliss first that the dawn to be alive. This is the first line of the Prelude. Okay, this is what I wanted to give some basic knowledge about Wordsworth. Okay, thank you guys for watching, and share our video and to your friends and classmates and your well-wishers if they like it. Okay, and we'll meet tomorrow same time. Sorry, we'll talk about the second writer St. Coleridge in our next class. See you then. And before you leave, like our class, a small request to you from my side. And can we have a list of biographical, autobiographical works by all the writers of various literary periods before we take our exam? Yes, I'll give you. Don't worry. Don't worry, I'll give you.